gentlemen, and thanks for listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. We have an amazing writer, journalist, and author on the phone today for the whole show all the way from Memphis, Tennessee. Bob Mehr is the music critic for the Memphis Daily, The Commercial Appeal. He has worked there for over a decade, where he has done extensive work on the history of Stax & Sons Studios, as well as breaking nationally and internationally the tragic deaths of Alex Chilton, Jay Retard, Jesse Winchester, and others. He is a regular contributor to Mojo Magazine, a monthly music mag out of the UK that I personally think is the greatest music mag on wheels. I've followed Bob's work there, where he's been contributing since 2003, including recent articles about Jeff Lynne of the Electric Light Orchestra, the pop band Squeeze, and British blues legend John Mayall. He is coming to the Turf Club in St. Paul on Saturday, March 5th, where he will be promoting and chatting about his incredible new book called Trouble Boys, The History of the Replacements. The book has been called The Roaring Rock and Roll Adventure, a heart-wrenching family drama, a cautionary showbiz tale, and a penetrating work of biography and a major addition to the rock book canon. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome for the entire show, all the way from Memphis, Tennessee, Mr. Bob Mehr.
Thank you, Paul. It's actually, the title is The True Story of the Replacements, but it's such a big book, it does feel like some sort of epic history. So,
yeah, well, and it's certainly probably the most in-depth look at the replacements that has been done.
Sure. For me, it was, there have been some other attempts. Michael Ozerod wrote a chapter of his great indie rock history, Our Band Could Be Your Life, and fellow Minneapolis guy, Jim Walsh, did a really nice oral history a few years ago on the band. But my feeling was I wanted to really tell the story from the inside out, and that ended up taking about 6 years to really do the research and kind of write the history from the ground up of this band and their experience in the music business.
I believe I met you 3 or 4 years ago when you were in town doing some research we hung out with our mutual friend Monty Lee Wilkes at the 400 Bar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you had Monty on recently. It was a great show.
Thank you.
I did get up to Minneapolis quite a bit. It seemed like I was up there every time it snowed or blizzard, or maybe that's. But I think often I would come mostly to interview Paul and various other people, Paul Westerberg of the Replacements, obviously. But he seemed to insist I come out in January and February, so maybe his idea of a joke for a guy who grew up like I did out west in California.
Well, Paul says that, that's the Westerberg sense of humor we've come to love over the years. When did you first hear the Replacements?
I like to tell people I actually saw them before I heard them in a way, and it was on their first national television appearance in early '86, which I read about on Saturday Night Live. I was a kid at the time, but happened to be watching the program, and I remember seeing their now somewhat infamous performance there. But it struck me from the first instant seeing the band. Just the kind of the attitude, the insouciance on stage, and how they kind of regarded or disregarded this big moment. So I guess I was struck first by seeing them on that show, and then got into the music a couple years later with Pleased to Meet Me, their album from '87. So, I think I had, like most people who are Replacements fans or become Replacements fans, I had a very visceral experience and first exposure to them.
Tell us a little bit about, I read that part, I believe there was a clip of that from the book in Rolling Stone on their online part of the Rolling Stone magazine.
They did an excerpt of that chapter, or kind of adaptation of that chapter on Rolling Stone Online earlier this month.
Tell the folks out there that don't necessarily remember that Replacements performance or know nothing about the Replacements, exactly the tension and drama that was going on at Saturday Night Live, what led up to it, and the performance itself and the aftermath.
Well, Replacements obviously being, this great band from Minnesota, had put their first 4 albums out on the local label Twin Tone Records. They were managed and kind of guided in their career by Peter Jesperson, one of the founders or co-founders of Twin Tone. And by the time they reached Saturday Night Live, they had just released their first major label record for Sire/Warner Brothers. They'd been signed by Sire Seymour Stein, who had an amazing track track record of signing bands back to the late 60s, and of course, it signed the Ramones and the Talking Heads and Pretenders and all these great groups, and the Replacements was really kind of part of that legacy. So they signed in beginning of '85 and put out their first major label record called Tim in the fall of '85, and shortly after, through kind of the auspices of Warner Brothers, they were allowed to get on and perform Saturday Night Live in January of '86. And, you know, for people who know that show and that the history of the show, that was kind of the low ebb of the program. Lorne Michaels had been gone for a number of years and had returned to the show. That was his first year back, Lorne being the creator and executive producer of Saturday Night Live. So, and it was a very tenuous time for the program. It was kind of, they weren't getting good ratings, and critics were sort of panning them. And so the Replacements came on to a situation that was already somewhat combustible. And of course, they sort of the proverbial match in a pool of gasoline. So, but their performance on their, you know, looking back, was actually a really great performance. I mean, what made it great for me as a kid watching it, and I think a lot of people who maybe that was their first exposure to the band, was seeing both the energy and the attitude and the feeling of the band, which I think was so different from bands at the time, particularly this being kind of the height of the mid-'80s and a certain polish and pop, and they just kind of took that stage and took that moment by the throat, and you know, ended up being what's now kind of regarded as a classic TV rock and roll moment.
And not long after that, and we'll go backwards, but not long after that, guitarist Bob Stinson was fired from the band. We're going to jump all over the place because the Replacements are very near and dear to my heart, both as a songwriter loving Westerberg stuff, but also basically coming of age musically at the same time they did. I remember going down to Orfolk Jokopus Records, where I lived 6 blocks away. I'd walk past there 6 times a week on my way to breakfast, and then stop there on the way back and spend $1 and get 2 brand new records from there. But you could really kind of feel the scene. You know, you'd bump into Bob Stinson down there. You'd bump into Bob Mould from Husker Du, guys from the suburbs. But I remember seeing Tommy Stinson, who would be on his lunch break, hanging out with Jesperson and Orfolk Jokopus Records. One thing that I really loved about the book, what I've seen so far, is the pictures. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to access all this great photo history of the band and their families.
Well, you know, and one of the things I wanted to set out to do was really kind of get into untapped sources, both in terms of interviewing the book, interviews for the book, which I did, you know, a couple hundred, almost 300 interviews for the book over the course of six and a half years. You know, talking to everybody from childhood friends to family to, you know, high school buddies, guys they played in bands with early on in the pre-Replacements years, through their days at Twin Tone and contemporaries in Minneapolis, in that scene, and then all the way up to, you know, the major label years, friends they knew and musical colleagues, producers, managers, you know, the whole thing. So I wanted to get as many perspectives as possible. And along the way, one of the things I was doing was also tracking down a lot of photos because, you know, they were kind of darlings of college rock and that world. And a lot of college newspapers, there would be photographers who would take these photos who probably never became professional photographers, and the photos were just sort of buried. So I did a lot of internet sort of sleuthing, looking at old clips that I got my hands on and seeing who the photo credit was and digging up, calling and finding, you know, searching for these people who, you know, had these Replacements negatives in their archives or somewhere buried in their house. And so I found, you know, many thousands of photos, of which there's about maybe 70 or so in the book, in addition to getting stuff directly from Paul and Tommy and their families. So I wanted to kind of sort of create a visual history as well to match some of these stories and some of these moments in the book. And, you know, like everything, it just took a little bit of legwork and a little bit of detective work to kind of find stuff that people hadn't really seen. And in some cases, dig through. I mean, the band was very fortunate in that they had 2 amazing visual chroniclers from Minneapolis, in Greg Helgeson and Dan Corrigan, who I'm sure you know.
Oh, yes.
both album covers and promo shots for them over the years, and some of Helgeson stuff. Greg's photo of Greg's is actually the cover of the book, and then of course I feature a lot of Daniel's work in the in the book too. So they were fortunate to have such keen-eyed photographers and people who could really capture them at various points in Minneapolis, and then moving on as they went out into the world and on tour. So for me, it was just digging a little deeper than had been before.
Well, it's really, when you look at of course, the family photos, those they're all young there, but I mean the early photographs of the Replacements, how young they all looked, especially Tommy, of course,
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I think, I don't know why it seems that way, but I mean, of course, Tommy was young, but even Paul at 19, 20, Bob, they're so fresh-faced. And,
oh, my God, yes. They look great.
Innocent eyed. So, it's kind of, for me, it was a package. I mean, obviously the book is very thorough. It's a 500-page book that's kind of a soup to nuts history of the band, but it felt like I needed to do the same kind of due diligence and legwork to get some photos that really captured those moments and those memories as well.
Well, you've done an amazing job. We're talking with Bob Mehr, who's from his home in Memphis, Tennessee. He's got a great new book on the Replacements called Trouble Boys. We're going to have him on for the whole show today. We're going to listen to a little Replacements, and after that, more with Bob Mehr on the Wall of Power Radio Hour.
Number one source of the Twin Cities gay scene is All Digital. Follow Twin Cities Gay Scene on Facebook and Twitter. Sign up for the Scene Shot email blast for weekly updates and chances to win great prizes. No app is needed to view the bi-weekly web editions of Scene. It's GLBTQ media for the mobile generation. Find it all at TwinCitiesGayScene.com. That's TwinCitiesGayScene.com.
Connections Radio Show is all about tapping into our hardwired hunger to connect. We examine meaningful connections to ourselves, our community, and the world around us. By opening the door to innovative insights by a wide variety of interesting guests, we'll make the connections to something bigger than ourselves. Join me, Lori Fitz, your host of Connections Radio Show, and together we'll make the connections. Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Tom Hartman here, letting you know how you can save money with All Energy Solar. One of the myths about solar is that it's too expensive and you need lots of money down. The truth? Solar is available for little or no money down. And if you have a great site for solar, you might even save money right away on a monthly basis. So don't wait to switch. You'll see your investment pay off the sooner you switch to All Energy Solar. So start saving today and visit allenergysolar.com.
Minnesota has a lot going on this summer, and I don't want to miss a moment of it. However, my carpets remind me of the good times later. That's why I call Zero Res. I'm not willing to waste a beautiful summer weekend washing rugs, so don't worry, because the carpet cleaning heroes at Zero Res can help. So schedule your cleaning today by calling 952-ZERO-RES, or you can book online at ZeroResMinnesota.com. Don't forget to ask for the special AM 950 listener pricing. Zero Res, spell it backward or forward. It spells the same.
Hi, this is Laura Headland with Food Freedom Radio. We want a regenerative revolution. What's that? It's a food system that works for water, soil, pollinators, and people. How do we get it? Maybe by being a little more lazy. So this summer, we're looking for lazy good food recipes. We're talking about how do we create a sane, kind food system. Food Freedom Radio, Saturdays at 8 a.m. or anytime on podcast. AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
It's grilling season, and Vinaigrette has some sizzling recipes to inspire you. How about summertime grilled fajitas? Just create a marinade with our golden balsamic or champagne vinegar and chili, garlic, or jalapeno olive oil and marinade beef or chicken. Add red onions, red, green, and yellow peppers and throw them on the grill. Or try grilled steak brushed with our truffle or garlic olive oil. Visit us at 50th and Xerxes in South Minneapolis and 287 Water Street in downtown Excelsior, or online at vinaigrettemn.com.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. On the line all the way from Memphis, Tennessee, author Bob Merrow is coming to town to the Turf Club on March 5th to talk about his boys, his boys, called his book, The Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements. Bob, let's talk a little bit about when we ended the last set. We were talking about the great 70 photographs that you culled from over 1,000 for the book. One that I really enjoyed was from the band Dog Breath that I think was Bob Stinson's band. But what I loved about it, Chris Mars, the drummer, who's now a very world-renowned artist, a visual artist and painter, painted the cover on the bass drum. And I thought, well, that's cool. It's got to be like one of the first, publicly recognized works of art by Chris Mars. So I thought that was cool. But tell us a little bit about Dog Breath. I've always loved that name.
Yeah, that was basically Bob Stinson after he had kind of spent a few years in the, state juvenile system, group homes and things like that. He came back to his family.
What Bob Dylan used to sing about, Within the Walls of Red Wing.
Within the walls of Red Wing, yes. So he'd been in Red Wing, he had been at various other facilities, and then, kind of came back. And for him, he'd had kind of a troubled childhood, but music for him really was the thing that sort of reconnected him with the world in a sense. And his ambition, in those years away was to really start a band. And he came back at the end of 77, back to his family and to his home, and really started what became Dog Breath with a buddy of his named Bob Flemmel, who he had met in group home. And it was just the two of them really starting the band. And then Tommy kind of got involved by force in a sense. Mm-hmm. Tommy was having his own sort of brushes with the law, and Bob saw him going down that road and wanted to stop that and help him. So he basically put a bass in his hand, taught him to play, and of course he was a convenient bass player to have because he didn't cost much, as Tommy joked. Bob would bribe him with some Cokes and candy bars to get him to play, and eventually it was the three of them. And then as it happened,
and he always knew where he could be found.
Of course, yeah, as well. And so all they were missing was a drummer, and as it happened, Bob was dating a girl named Andy Olson, and she happened to be neighbors with a guy named Chris Mars, who, of course, would become Dog Breath's drummer and the Replacements drummer. And Chris and Andy is the one, actually, who took the photo of that Dog Breath drum kit that is seen in the book, which I think is the first kind of actual evidence of the band existing. And she has several other photos of the band in a very, very young-looking Chris Mars and Bob and Tommy Stinson with long hair and peach fuzz mustaches and that sort of stuff. So it's kind of really interesting. It's just, I suppose, in a way, everybody kind of sees the Replacements as a band of the 80s and kind of looking the way they look with the plaid shirts and stuff, but they were children of the 70s in a big way, and it's really fascinating to see those images of them, almost looking like different people as they were coming up in the middle late 70s. So Andy took those photos, and she's still up in Minnesota and was a great resource for the book. But she's kind of the one that brought Chris Mars into the fold with Dog Breath later to become the Replacements.
Tell us a little bit about the influences and the early years of Paul Westerberg. I know there was a guy named Zika, a high school buddy of his that passed, unfortunately, way too young. But he also had some history on the West Bank.
Yeah, but, it's interesting. Paul's rooting, he had older sisters, a sister a decade older, and so, of course, he came up under the influence of the British invasion and 60s R&B and all the stuff that was popular, when he was about 5 or 6. He had teenage sisters, so he got that. And then he had an older brother, about 6 years older, who really exposed him, both through his brother and his brother's pals, to kind of the folk and blues music that was really prevalent, obviously, on the West Bank, and that whole scene that was still had been very, obviously very potent in the 60s and kind of still lingering even into the 70s. And so, Paul's rooting really was fundamentally in blues and folk initially. And I actually talk a little bit about, the first time Paul went into a recording studio, he had won a prize package by answering a trivia question, and the prize was some studio time, and he went in and recorded what he described as a kind of Leo Kottke-styled original that ended up getting played on the local NPR station. And so, that's where his initial musical influences were, and of course he expanded into, he also loved bubblegum pop, and the glam rock that was coming out of the 70s, and then more into the harder rock and stuff a little bit that he kind of pursued really as a lead guitarist in the years before the Replacements. I mean, he spent about 4 or 5 years kicking around bands and little ad hoc combos in the Twin Cities as a lead guitarist, and he could play that boogie blues stuff like nobody's business.
It's funny. That's the first time maybe ever that I've heard Leo Kottke and Paul Westerberg mentioned in the same sentence. But it doesn't surprise me. I mean, the 60s and 70s folk and blues scene on the West Bank to this day still continues with John Kerner still playing out there, and Willie Murphy and Tony Glover. I gotta ask you, there's a great picture, Bob, of like I said, I love the 70 photos that I've seen in the book, but the great one of the cassette demo, the legendary demo that Westerberg gave to Jesperson. Did you get a chance to hear that?
Oh, yeah, and that was the material on that did end up finally getting released in 2008 when the Rhino Warner Brothers did some album reissues. So it's kind of a bonus on the Replacements' first album. But that actual cassette, I had it in my hands and took a look at it. It's now in the collection of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as a matter of fact.
As well it should be.
Or on loan anyway from Peter Jesperson. But yeah, that was kind of the thunderbolt moment for Peter in terms of hearing them and playing that cassette, which Paul had dropped off to Orphuc Joke Opus, which was the store that Peter managed. But in fact, the real history is the Replacements had done an earlier demo and sent it into Twin Tone for an album of kind of local submissions they were taking, which they got a polite but firm rejection. Of course, they didn't know at the time that they would be getting into the Replacements business just a few months later with this famous now cassette demo.
And really one of kind of the bedrocks of Twin Tone Records. The other thing that I think should go into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and when we had Monty Wilkes on the Wall of Power Radio Hour a couple of months ago, we talked about the legendary trip with the RV of Jesperson, Wilkes, and the band that they had to, that basically it came back to the rental shop as just a shell. I believe that picture, there's a picture in there of that trip when they're dismantling the RV. Is that from that trip, or was that another unfortunate RV?
Actually, I think that's the photo that's in the book was of another similar incident on a bus later on. So they moved up in the world, but sort of kept the same MO. But yeah, and they did some similar stuff to a Sprinter van in England that I have some photos that I didn't include in the book. But the funny story about that is they really couldn't find, Peter Jesperson wanted to sort of upgrade their accommodations. This was for their first real major label tour, and really couldn't find anybody in the Twin Cities who would rent to a rock and roll band. So I think he found somebody, I believe it was in Elk River or somewhere up there. And
a northern suburb.
Northern suburbs. And the guy said to Peter, and the story is in the book, he said, Peter, I'm tired of rock bands being treated as second-class citizens. I tell you what, I'll rent to you. And, of course, famous last words. But yeah, so that's, kind of was one of their legends was their sort of systematic destruction. It wasn't, chaotic. It was very deliberate the way they would pull these things apart on the road.
We've got Bob Baer on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. His new book, Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements. He's coming to town on March 5th at the Turf Club. We'll have him on for the next 2 sets. Listen to Little Replacements, and back in just a bit.
Hi, this is Charlie. My dad is Minnesota's wildly popular and handsome radio host, Matt McNeil. Did I say that right, Dad?
Perfect!
When I got my driver's license, my parents let me drive a Sienna from Rudy Luther Toyota. I love it. It's easy, comfortable, and hauls all my baseball gear. And my parents love the safety. That's why they wanted me in the Sienna.
Thanks to Rudy Luther Toyota, my son is safe as he begins his driving adventure. We're a 2 Sienna family thanks to Rudy Luther Toyota. Visit them today in Golden Valley at 169 and 394.
Oh no, you shattered your cell phone. Now what? Listen closely. We know you're lost without your phone. Bring it to Computer Revolution today. We'll fix it and have you back online before someone asks, "Where are you?" Computer Revolution with cell phone repair has over 18 years experience fixing computer devices, all brands, all carriers. Computer Revolution with cell phone repair, located in Roseville at Highway 36 and Fairview Avenue, or call 651-633-6600. We fix phones, same day, 7 days a week.
Hey, podcast fans, did you know that StandUpRecords.com has live comedy CDs of some of your favorite podcast personalities? Folks like Jackie Cation of the Dork Forest, Robert Kelly of You Know What Do, the Sklar Brothers from Sklarbro Country, Doug Stanhope from Doug Stanhope's podcast, and Mark Maron from WTF. You've heard them for free. Why not consider spending some money to find out what they do for a living? Just head on over to StandUpRecords.com or look for Stand Up Records at Amazon.com or the iTunes Music Store. That's StandUpRecords.com.
The Seward Co-op Creamery Cafe is ready for the cold, serving seasonal dishes using locally sourced ingredients, Minnesota craft beers, and organic wines. Their delicious vegetarian, vegan, and omnivorous menu options are sure to satisfy. New items include the cauliflower po' boy, harvest chili, braised beef tostada, and the pork banh mi, as well as rotating seasonal vegetables and pasta. Sustaining a healthy community, you will find Seward Co-op Creamery Cafe at 2601 East Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis and online at coopcreamery.coop.
Saturdays at 1 p.m., you have a chance at a fresh start, a new beginning. Hi, everybody. This is Freddie Bell, host of New Beginnings. Our show features the concerns of America's 78 million baby boomers in employment, finance, health and nutrition, spirituality, and even entertainment. Every day is a chance for a fresh start. Join us Saturdays at 1 p.m. for New Beginnings with Freddie Bell on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
I'm John Peterson, and at Ferndale Market, we are proud to provide our free-range turkey to local restaurants and natural food stores. One of our partners since the beginning has been Birchwood Cafe, and we're excited to announce a new partnership product, the Birchwood Turkey Burger Patty. Made from their popular turkey burger recipe, using our antibiotic-free turkey and Birchwood's local and organic ingredients. Put an end to bland turkey burgers. Find this and all our Ferndale turkey products at your local co-op or natural food store. Visit ferndalemarket.com.
With your AM 950 weather, I'm Sam Turnberg. Tonight will be partly cloudy with a low around 67. Tomorrow's partly sunny with a high near 87. Monday, partly sunny with a high near 87. Tuesday, partly sunny with a high near 75. And Wednesday, sunny with a high near 76. The Eat Local Minnesota Restaurant of the Week is Burger Mo's, the perfect neighborhood gathering spot before or after Xcel Energy events. Having 2 happy hours and more than 60 beers on tap, come visit them at 242 West 7th Street in St. Paul. More information at burgermos.com.
You are back with the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. On the line for the entire show today, author, journalist, and cool cat, Bob Maher. His new book called Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements, can be found at my favorite bookstore in town, Majors and Quinn. I'm sure Amazon.com as well. But Bob will be in town on Saturday, March 5th at the Turf Club in St. Paul at 4 p.m. It's an all-ages show. They're going to have a Q&A, and Bob also promises some Rare Matt's audio and visual treats for the crowd. Bob, I want to talk a little bit about your history as a journalist and a writer. I've read a lot of your reviews of both concerts and records in my favorite music magazine, Mojo, and it was a pleasure meeting you briefly a few years back. But how did you get into this whole writing game?
Well, that's a good question. I sort of fell into it in a sense. I had grown up mostly in California, and then later high school and college moved to Arizona. And one of the really kind of interesting stories at that time, there was a band called the Gin Blossoms. Obviously, they were a multi-platinum band, and actually recorded at Ardent in Memphis with some of the same people that the Replacements recorded with. Their chief singer-songwriter, or rather their chief songwriter and lead guitarist was a guy named Doug Hopkins, who was sort of booted from the band in the midst of their first major label record. But as it turned out, the songs he wrote ended up being big hits and catapulting that record to massive success, multi-platinum success. And of course, he committed suicide, sadly, right as that was happening. So it's a really interesting, in Arizona lore, it was a really interesting story. And I knew some of the people involved and who knew Doug. And so for me, I was just kind of working in radio, doing basic entertainment stuff straight out of college. And I really wanted to tell this story about this guy, because to me it seemed like, how many people have ever taken their own lives while they were, about to become millionaires and riding high on the charts. I mean, I can sort of think of Kurt Cobain and this guy Doug Hopkins from the Gin Blossoms. So I spent, my intention was really just to tell this one story, and I spent a number of months, this was back in 98, researching it in Phoenix, and published it in the Alt Weekly there, the Phoenix New Times. And it got such an amazing response that basically they hired me as the music editor there. And this was, of course, back in the heyday of alt weeklies, and we were putting out 200-page issues and stuff. And the company really expanded during that time. They ended up merging with the Village Voice, and, of course, were part of the thing that the City Pages was there in Minneapolis. So really my intention was to write one story, and I kind of did well enough with it and got enough interest there in Phoenix locally that I sort of got put on this track to be a music critic and music writer. And from there sort of bounced around. I was in Phoenix for several years, and then to Seattle, actually working for the Village Voice Media Company, and then to an alt weekly in Chicago called The Reader. And then about 10 years ago, I got asked to come down to Memphis and work for the daily paper here, which is a very old daily. We're a 175-year-old paper that's in the process of being actually purchased by the Gannett Company. So, I'm fortunate to be here in Memphis, one that it's just, as you can imagine, just rich with so many stories and so many people and so many interesting tales of R&B and blues and early rock and roll up to the contemporary stuff, and have kind of, frankly, been working on the book for most of the time I've been down here on the Replacements book, but have had just incredible experiences. So, I guess after whatever it is, 17, almost 18 years of doing this, I have to say this is what I do. So I'm a professional music writer, I guess.
Well, congratulations. See, it's that little piece of happenstance and synchronicity, I guess, is our gain. I really enjoy your writing. Did you get a chance to, I can't remember when Jim Dickinson, a great Memphis musician, piano player, passed away. It was a few years ago, but did you
get a
2009. Chance? Yeah, so did you get a chance to talk to him at all about working with the Replacements?
Oh yeah, I talked to Jim and knew Jim fairly well from the years I was here and even before, and close with his family and his sons, Luther and Cody, were still obviously making great music. And it's funny, I did a story on Jim. Jim was releasing a solo record in 2009 in this late spring, May, and went down to his ranch studio down in Mississippi and did a long interview with him for his own solo record that was coming out, and had plans to come out the following week to interview him formally for the Replacements book. Of course, we talked about the band many times over the years, and he entered the hospital, and obviously a few months later, it never came out. Basically, a few months later, he passed away, which is really tragic. But I had a lot of volumes of material on Jim to sort of pull from, and obviously he's a really big character in the book, and certainly in the period of Pleased to Meet Me, which is the record that he produced for the Replacements. And he was in some ways the most successful producer, or the producer who was most successful working with the Replacements and sort of managing and harnessing their chaos into a really great record. So, yeah, Jim and Memphis kind of is a big part of the Replacement story, at a very interesting point in that middle period where they had just parted ways with Bob Stinson and were kind of operating as a three-piece and a little bit uncertain about their future. And I think coming down to Memphis, which was the first record the band had made outside of Minneapolis, was really key in kind of allowing them to carry on, really.
Now, was that the first record with Slim Dunlap?
Well, actually, Slim was not on the record. He was hired at the very tail end of the making and sort of mixing. He did come down to Memphis for now kind of famous playback party, which I detail in the book, where all the Warner Brothers and Sire staff came down. And in fact, Paul tells a story that Jim offered him the opportunity to play on it, but Slim, being the humble guy he is, demurred and said, no, this is your record. And so really, Slim was in the band for that whole Pleased to Meet Me touring cycle, and even before the record was out, but wasn't actually on the LP. The first album that Slim played on was the next one, Don't Tell a Soul.
So when was the first time you actually saw and heard the Replacements live and in person, Bob?
I saw them twice. Obviously, I'm 41, or on the verge of being 41, so I'm a little bit younger, so I managed to see them only with the live, at least initially, with the Slim version of the band. I saw them open on, again, a kind of now infamous Tom Petty tour that they opened a couple months for in the summer of '89, and then I saw them again on the final tour in '91 with Slim and also with Steve Foley, who was their last drummer after Chris Marr split the band during that last go-around.
Steve was a great guy, and one of the things I'm proudest of in my life, when Steve, after he was out of the band, became a car salesman. My brother needed a car, so I hooked him up with Steve, and Steve hooked my brother John up with some real rockin' set of wheels. So, and Steve was happy for the sale. Great guy. May rest in peace.
Yeah, no, he was a great guy, and I talked to his family, his sister Colleen, and Steve was part of that, part of the Curtis A sort of family and franchise. That's where he got, I think, a lot of his rooting, and played in a lot of bands up there. So, it's an interesting thing is there was basically 6 people who were in the Replacements, the 4 original members, and then Slim and Steve. So it's a pretty tight crew there, and obviously there's been some tragedy there with Bob passing, with Steve passing, and of course Slim's recent health woes. But it's a really fascinating story to kind of tell everybody's backgrounds too, and how they came to the band or how they came to music through Minneapolis. So that was really one of the things I wanted to do with the book, was focus not just on Paul and Tommy and Bob and Chris, but also on the other people that were in the band or in the band's orbit.
Well, and it was an incredible orbit, the late 70s, and certainly the 80s. One of the godfathers of the whole, rock and roll scene, early to mid-'70s on, of course, is Curtis A. Did you get a chance to talk to Curtis about
I did.
the life and times?
I spent a good bit of time with Curtis down in his basement lair, which is one of the most incredible pop culture tropes you see. And
tell the people, I've been in there a couple of times. Actually, there's been a couple of times that I borrowed a suit if I had a big gig coming up from Curtis, and he's a bit of a haberdasher. In fact, that's what he said. He didn't do rock and roll. He'd run a clothing store. But tell the people out there a little bit about the basement lair, because it's just incredible.
Oh, well, it's just, there are people more well-versed in comic books and sort of that culture than I am. But, you talk about a rock and roll comic book, Nirvana. It's just records and books and figurines. And, of course, Curtis is an amazing, amazing artist. He does these just mind-blowing collages that are, kind of collections of all this sort of pop culture stuff, magazines, clippings, little bits of pieces that he puts together. And it's sort of like seeing his work is kind of like being inside of his brain, which is a dangerous place to be, but it's also a really fascinating place to be. And Curtis is really kind of one of the heroes. And really, Peter Jesperson talks about it in the book. Part of his motivation, or his main motivation for wanting to start Twin Tone, along with Paul Stark and Charlie Hallman, was to put out Curtis A records. And of course, Slim Dunlap was Kurt's right hand, all those years. And sort of twin, and so there's a big Kurt connection with Paul and the Replacements. And Curtis, I think jokingly, but Paul took it seriously, gave him some advice. Slim being the sort of calm, collected character that he was, he said, if you want to get Slim, or Bob Dunlap as he was then, if you want to get Bob Dunlap to play really well, you got to get him mad. And Paul joked that I kept that advice in my back pocket for a while until we got to Europe, and then I unplugged him in the middle of a solo, and then he got really mad and played really good. So. So Kurt kind of plays a role in that, a major role, and certainly in the early history of Twin Tone and that Minneapolis scene, and of course giving both, in a sense, Bob and Steve, or Slim and Steve Foley, into the Replacements out of his years in his band.
A great, quick little Curtis A story. I had started booking a blues club in uptown Minneapolis. I wanted to get Kurt in there. I invited him down and buy him lunch. He was happy to be there because the comics came out at the comic book store right up the street. I had a guy, general manager, that had just got back. He started working at this blues club that shall remain homeless, and he had just seen Ike Turner, and so I was just introducing these guys. The GM came from like the Holiday Inn, and Curtis A comes, is the king of rock and roll, and so the GM says, "Yeah, I just saw Ike Turner in Memphis," and this beginning the conversation, and Kurt just stops in his tracks. He goes, that really makes me mad. And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Cripes almighty," he said, "We can forgive Germany, but we can't forgive Ike Turner."
Well, and Kurt's forever my friend now because I gave him a copy of the Wilson Pickett box set, which is, Wilson is his big hero. And I kind of, there's a guy working on a Wilson Pickett biography, and I said, you got to talk to Kurt because I'm sure Kurt has some stories,
Oh, absolutely. Years, so. We've only got about a minute left in this set. We're speaking with Bob Mehr, the author of a great new book called Trouble Boys, The True Story, The Replacements. Bob's going to be in St. Paul on March 5th at 4 p.m. at the Turf Club. And like I say about the Turf Club, if Jack Ruby ran any club in the Twin Cities, it would be the Turf Club. And I mean that in the finest way. It's a great old venue. What sort of audio and visual treats are you going to have for us? Can you give a little bit away now?
Sure. Well, I'm going to be talking about the book, and I think we wanted to do something in a fun sort of bar club environment. The folks from First Avenue were helping put on the show, and the good folks at Mayers and Quinn are selling the books there. And I'm going to play some stuff that kind of almost a DJ set of stuff that you would have heard in the Replacements van and things that were influences on the band. And we may even show some clips of stuff that people haven't seen. So I just kind of wanted to make it a sort of fun multimedia event there on the 5th, and hopefully it'll be that.
We've got Bob Mehr on the line. Bob, we're going to have you back for one more set on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. We really appreciate taking your time. We're going to talk a little bit about what you think makes the Replacements so damn good. We'll be back after these.
The number one source of the Twin Cities gay scene is all digital. Follow Twin Cities Gay Scene on Facebook and Twitter. Sign up for the Scene Shot email blast for weekly updates and chances to win great prizes. No app is needed to view the bi-weekly web editions of Scene. It's GLBTQ media for the mobile generation. Find it all at TwinCitiesGayScene.com. That's TwinCitiesGayScene.com.
Is it time to downsize but don't know where to start? Give the House Geeks with Bricks Real Estate a call. We're experienced in making this process as easy as possible. Whether it is help with pricing your home, assistance in finding movers, or any of the other professionals you might need to get your home sold, we're here for you. Take the worry away by giving us a call today at 612-207-5388. That's 612-207-5388 or online anytime at housegeeks.com.
Hi, Matt McNeil for Rudy Luther Toyota. With summertime here, my family is super excited about the road trips we'll be taking in our Toyota Sienna. We're going to be putting a lot of miles in, but a Sienna is the most comfortable way to drive. Plenty of room for the 5 of us to stretch out and enjoy the ride, even with the dog and all of our gear tagging along. Safety and reliability are key, and Rudy Luther Toyota Siennas are the most safe, most reliable vehicles we've ever driven. Test drive one yourself at Rudy Luther Toyota, the southeast corner of 394 and 169 in Golden Valley.
As with their Eat Street sister on Nicollet Avenue, the Bad Waitress at 700 Central and Northeast is committed to working with local purveyors and serving organic food whenever possible. But the Northeast location is a bit more grown up. This finer diner has a full bar serving craft cocktails and a brand new inventive dinner menu, including the chicken and waffle with roasted half chicken, bourbon pickled jalapeno corn waffle, and a roasted poblano gravy. Check out the Northeast menu at thebadwaitress.com.
Saturdays at 1 p.m., you have a chance at a fresh start, a new beginning. Hi, everybody. This is Freddie Bell, host of New Beginnings. Our show features the concerns of America's 78 million baby boomers in employment, finance, health and nutrition, spirituality, and even entertainment. Every day is a chance for a fresh start. Join us Saturdays at 1 p.m. for New Beginnings with Freddie Bell on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Shamblat from Shamblat Family Dentistry. We're the fear-free, get-you-out-of-pain-now dental office.
And I'm Rachel Shamblat. Did you know a lot of people are afraid of the dentist? You don't need to be afraid of my dad. He makes going to the dentist comfortable and even fun.
We don't care if you're a dental regular or haven't seen a dentist in years. We just want to make you comfortable and get you out of pain.
If you don't see my dad, please see another dentist. Take care of your teeth because they're the only ones you get. Call 1-800-FIX-MY-TEETH or visit fixmyteeth.us.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. On the line and on the show for the entire show tonight, Bob Mehr wrote a book called Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements that's just out on the Da Capo Press label. Bob, tell me what you think makes the Replacements one of the greatest American rock and roll bands.
Well, I think in the bigger picture, you always have to talk about the songs. Paul is, in some ways, as incisive and profound a songwriter, kind of working in that rock and pop medium as we've had. There's just something about him. There's a kind of ineffable quality that hit people in their guts, and in their heads and their hearts and all over their body, really, with those songs that he was writing and continues to write. And I think the combination of that within the context of a great, wild rock and roll band, and they were a rock and roll band because I think, they had their own kind of swing and their own kind of roots and blues and folk, and they really could do anything. So I think it's a combination of those two things. Plus, there's an aura about them, in part because during their career they did such wild things and maybe fell just short of the kind of success that everybody expected for them. But again, in the long term, they've endured and they've succeeded in part because they have this romance attached to them. So, between the songs and just the power of that band and that combination of people, and then the kind of aura that it still continues to this day. That's why I think you see, in the last couple of years when they did their reunion, that's why a band that is considered a quote-unquote commercial failure during the 80s is selling out 14,000 seats in their hometown or in New York. They played that show at Midway Stadium at the end of 2014, and it was just unbelievable to see that. And then the next week they played the Tennis Stadium in Forest Hills in New York, and there's 14,000 people singing those songs back to you. So there's no way other than looking at it as a huge success and a triumph for the band ultimately.
Well, and the thing I was listening to Terry Gross on Fresh Air on National Public Radio, and they had a reviewer, I believe it was Ken Tucker, talking about the new Juliana Hatfield Paul Westerberg record. They're calling themselves the I Don't Cares. And I was listening to Westerberg sing, and I go, there's three male voices. For me, it's kind of like the psychic and audio wallpaper of the Twin Cities, the voices that just remain with you. One is Spider Giant Kerner. One is Curtis. Well, there's more than three, but you got Willie Murphy, Prudence Johnson, a female, but you got Westerberg's voice that is it's unmistakable when you listen to him on the radio or at a party. If he's on a record, you go, that's Paul Westerberg. He just has that undefinable, really soulful, fragile but tough voice.
And I think there's more connections there than, maybe meets the eye, because I know Paul talked about growing up, he was a guy who loved Pickett, and obviously Curtis A. is hugely influenced by Pickett, and Paul, again, is a guy who had a big connection to that West Bank scene. I mean, he talks about how he learned to play harmonica from the Tony Glover book. So, and of course, they had Tony Glover on stage at Midway. That's no accident. So I think, there are these threads that connect those distinctive Minneapolis voices and Twin Cities voices, and it's because some of the rooting is the same. So, and of course, all those guys have put their own individual spin, and they have their own idiosyncrasies. But there is a common bond there, I think, that comes through, and that's what makes them so so memorable.
We just have a few minutes left. We've got Bob Mehr on the line, author and great music writer. He's got his book, Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements, that's just out on the Da Capo Press. What are a few things that you might have just stumbled into that surprised you, that you didn't know you would discover when you were doing this 6-year project working on the history of the Replacements?
Oh, God, so many little factoids and things just from talking about. I mean, to me, the interesting thing was learning about the Minneapolis of that early 70s and mid-70s, and how the Twin Cities was such a thriving place in the 60s, and I think in a way the rock scene, not so much the West Bank blues and folk scene, but the rock scene really became kind of the province of show bands and cover bands by the early 70s, and then I think that in a sense birthed the kind of new wave movement, starting with Curtis A. and bands like the Hipsters. It started doing kind of that return to original, real rock and roll stuff. And the other part was, for me, that was interesting was finding out about where the culture was. I mean, so much was happening in and around record stores, and I think that twin tone scene and that Minneapolis new wave scene in the late 70s really was birthed out of places like Orfolk Joke Opus, because I think the radio, the rock radio had kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit in terms of being progressive, and then the clubs, had done the same in terms of original music. So for me, like just finding out that sort of backstory of where Minneapolis was and how it was that, the twin tone bands and bands like the Replacements emerged out of that context was really fascinating.
Well, I had an author by the name of Rick Sevchak who wrote a great book that you would enjoy, Bob, called Everybody's Heard About the Bird, that talks about that great 60s history of, the Castaways and Liar Liar and the Trashmen and Dave Dudley and all that great stuff. But it's fun to see you from out of town kind of put the 70s and 80s and the 90s part of it together. It's kind of all one big musical gumbo, I guess.
And, of course, I mentioned the Replacements, Tim, their first major label album. And, of course, that was recorded at the studios that was K-Bank Studios, where the Castaways and the Trashmen and Dave Dudley had recorded all those hits for Soma back in the 60s. So, Minneapolis is a big city but a small town, and certainly when it comes to their music, so those connections and those people and those places and those ties are there through the Replacements story.
Yeah, and then, of course, Husker Du officed out of there. Grant Hart wrote a book called 2524, which is the address on Nicollet Avenue for the studio that is still up and running. We've got about a minute left, Bob. What is the Capo Press? Do they got you on the road? Where else are you going with the book, and what are you looking forward to do with Trouble Boys, the book?
Yeah, well, I'm starting here in Memphis, my hometown, doing a thing on the 1st, and then, of course, flying out to Minneapolis. I'll be around town for a few days with the event at the Turf Club on the 5th, and then going to do, weekenders here. When I go to the West Coast, I might do some dates in a row, but really just kind of letting the book get out there. The official release is March 1st, although it's sort of available now. I'm coming to find out that book release dates aren't as hard and fast as record releases, so your Amazons, your Barnes & Nobles, and some of the indie booksellers already have it out there, but the official release is March 1. And so let the book get out there and the press do its stuff, and then I'll be hitting the road more and more. But, for me, the big thing was to do Minneapolis that first week, or the Twin Cities, and so that's why I'm coming to the Turf Club.
Well, we are honored that you took the time to chat with us on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Do you have a website, Bob, or how can people track down the books online if they can't make the Turf Club or can't...
Absolutely. I've got a pretty neat website for the book that I'm going to be updating with stuff and stories, but of course, and you can order on there. It's just replacementsbook.com, and people can find me also on Twitter at Bob Mayer. I'll be talking a lot about the Replacements and little anecdotes and stories, so they can follow me there. But replacementsbook.com is where to go to get the book.
Thank you so much, Bob Mayer, who just wrote a great book that's out right about now called Trouble Boys, The True Story of the Replacements. Good luck, Bob. I'm hoping to make your show at the Turf Club on Saturday, March 5th. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Paul. Look forward to seeing you.
Okay, brother. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This show is produced by Paul Metza, engineered by Brad Knauber, and recorded at the Minneapolis Media Institute. Support our sponsors. Follow us online at wallofpowerradio.com. Like us on Facebook at Wall of Power Radio Hour. And like my dad said, remember to be kind and make someone happy.